This is a very basic, simple video in simple terms about how to change the intake gaskets on a 4.3 V6. Maybe this will help someone. This is a project that I had to start because I had a slight oil leak at the front of this engine intake manifold, and I was also losing antifreeze. It was leaking on my new driveway. Shown in this photo is a yellow arrow showing the coil wire that goes to the distributor, and why I did that you will see in just a few minutes. Here I'm starting to take the engine apart. I've already taken the belt and the air cleaner off of it. Number 1 to your left shows the coil that I've laid aside. The coil wire goes over to number 4 right in the center of the distributor rotor, and that spark leaves where it shows number 3. That goes to your distributor cap and wires to each cylinder. The center contact point is shown by the red arrow right in the center of that distributor cap on figure 2. A little further apart now, taking more and more parts off. Here is the lower aluminum intake manifold shown with the upper plastic intake manifold taken off. Here are some of the parts inside this intake manifold covered by the upper plastic intake manifold. Number 1 is the fuel pressure regulator. Number 2 is where the wiring harness goes to turn on and off the fuel injectors. And also right beside that is where the fuel lines go, the 2 little holes. Number 4 are the intake ports. Number 3 are the little fuel lines that go to each injector. There is a large O-ring gasket that goes around this plastic intake at the base of it, where it bolts up to the aluminum part of the intake. And there are O-rings that go around the throttle body where it's bolted, and also the fuel line connectors. This photo shows where the intake manifold has been removed from the engine, and all the dirt and crap that's on top of this engine. You put down a piece of paper to keep all that junk out from inside the engine so it won't do any damage. This shows the underside of that aluminum intake manifold. Number 1 shows the EGR, or exhaust gas recirculation valve. Number 2 shows the engine coolant temperature sensor for the computer. Number 3 shows the thermostat and gasket. Number 4 shows the throttle plate. The throttle plate in the throttle body is where the air goes in. No fuel, just air. Goes into the engine. Number 5 is where a tube comes from your exhaust system into that intake manifold to be reburned or recycled. Number 6 shows the throttle position sensor for your computer. Number 7 vacuum fitting goes to your PCV valve. Number 8 shows where the 2 fuel lines go. One comes from the tank under pressure, and then there is a return line that goes back to the tank. Number 9 shows where the electrical connector for the fuel injectors go to turn the injectors off and on. And number 10, vacuum port, vacuum line goes to your brake booster. Number 11 is Papa's foot. Number 12 is where the distributor goes in through the intake into the engine. Number 13 shows the manifold air pressure sensor, or the MAP sensor. That gives information to the computer how much vacuum is available inside the engine, what the status is. Number 14 is where a line hooks to the purge valve, goes to the top of your fuel tank, and allows fuel tank vapors to enter the engine at a certain time and be burned instead of vented to the atmosphere. Number 15 shows where the throttle cable hooks to the throttle body. Number 16 is the fitting where coolant goes to your heater. The engine has been scraped with a razor blade and cleaned with thinner, ready for new gaskets. This is all self-explanatory. FailPro makes a lot better than original equipment gaskets and are used for high-performance engine and racing. Of course, they're a lot more expensive, but they're a heck of a lot better gasket than what comes on it. Number 1 shows where a shaft would go up inside this distributor shaft, and that shaft would go down to the oil pump and drive the oil pump to lubricate the engine. Number 2 shows the gear that would go to the camshaft that drives the distributor. There's a very thin gasket at number 3 where the distributor goes to the intake manifold. Number 4 is a retainer that holds the distributor in the engine and at a certain point so the engine is not out of time. Number 5 shows the connector that hooks up to your computer system and also powers the ignition distributor. Number 6 shows the rotating white plastic distributor cap that distributes the spark to all the different cylinders. This shows inside the engine. Number 1 is the oil pressure sending unit that works your gauge. Number 2 is the high pressure inlet line to the fuel injectors. Number 3 is the low pressure return line. Number 4 is where you have a gasket made of RTV, which is silicone caulk, that goes across the intake at position number 4. Number 5 shows the 4 coolant ports where the antifreeze and water mixture enters the intake manifold to preheat it. Number 6 shows all the intake ports that go into the cylinder head where the air and fuel mixture goes to be burned. Number 7 shows where the engine's valve lifters, which are roller lifters, where they go. Number 8 shows what they call a counterbalance shaft, which rotates to keep the engine in balance because it's a 6-cylinder. V8s don't need that. And right under the balance shaft, number 8, number 10 would be the camshaft that opens the valves. It has the lobes on it, eccentric lobes. Number 9 shows the push rods that go up from the camshaft and valve lifters to open each and every valve. Number 11 shows the holes where the intake manifold bolts go to hold the intake to the engine. There are 8 intake bolts. I'm almost finished here. I need to put my air conditioning compressor, which is shown here by the arrow. I didn't have to drain the Freon, remove the Freon. I just had to pull that air conditioning compressor aside. Now all I need to do is put all the fluids back in it, the oil and the antifreeze, and check for leaks and put the fan belt back on and road test it, and hopefully everything will be okay.